with the man himself, Marc Ryan. Marc, I appreciate you taking the time, my friend. Great to see you. What's going on?
Always good to catch up with you, Chris Phillips, and the Spurs Up Show crowd. What's good? I've missed you guys. Hope everyone's having a good week. And we are getting ready, Chris, for the two most unproductive work days in American history, Thursday and Friday. What is your strategy, Chris, for Thursday and Friday? In the days, Chris, when we had real jobs, what was your strategy? You either call in sick. You're either at work in body but not in mind, right?
Yeah.
Or you just take the days off. What do you do?
Yeah, so when I was going to ask you the same thing, Marc, but my previous experience before the business was sales and digital marketing. So kind of a loose, lax atmosphere for anybody who's worked in sales. It's a little bit more laid back, if you will. I will say, I'll never forget, Marc, 2016, I actually took those 2 days off, Thursday, Friday, like 3 months in advance. I was like, I want to do nothing but sit around. I was also gambling on sports a little bit at that point here and there. And I knew I was like, I want to be putting action in. I want to watch basketball nonstop for the next 3-4 days, what have you. So taking the days off is always a great strategy. But if not, the good news was, again, when we worked in sales, we would actually put the games up on a projector at one of the places I worked at. So but you're right, Marc, nothing gets done. I mean, truly nothing gets done. They should be considered national holidays, in my opinion. I don't know. Like, why even fight it? Why not just all embrace it, right? I mean, so.
If we got days off, which for sports holidays, Chris, if we got days off for sports holidays, and look, I think it's time. Sports has reached a place in our country where we should have a sports holiday. Do you do the day after the Super Bowl? Do you do opening day of Major League Baseball? Brother, I am doing one, if not both of these 2 days of March Madness because, look, all these people are at work and not working. And I'll tell you, Chris, a story from inside the business. And by the way, on the chat, Lynn Turner and Jay Smith said hello. What's good to you guys? Great to see you as well. Chris, this was circa 2012, okay? 11 years ago. First day of March Madness, I had 103 fever. What did I do? I showed up to work. Why? Because I knew if I called in sick, they would think I was playing hooky.
Yeah.
No one's going to believe you. It's the worst day to actually be sick because no one believes that you actually are. And I'm like, okay, when I walk in there and when I get on the air, they're going to be like, this guy looks and sounds like crap, which is no different from any other day, you know? But then they saw me, they heard me, and they're like, go home. Please go home. You're a really sick dude. So, yeah, man, that's the way it goes, man. But I'm excited about it. Furman taking on Virginia. Gamecocks knocking Clemson out of the tournaments, or at least indirectly knocking them out of the tournaments. There's a lot to kick around with you, my friend.
Yeah, Marc, for sure. And I was going to say, too, that speaking of the sports holidays, I think Monday after the Super Bowl is a no-brainer for me. Like, I think, as a baseball fan, I would love to see, opening day. I think that'd be a really cool one because there's games all day long and all that. But, like, I could live with that one not being a holiday. But the Monday after the Super Bowl, Marc, that to me just makes too much sense. That truly makes too much sense to me. But whatever. It is what it is.
Well, yeah, but look, Chris, we get like Columbus Day. You know what I mean? We get like
just trade it, right? Just trade it.
We get President's Day.
Yeah.
Give me 2 days, okay? And if you give me 2 days, Chris, I am going to choose either the first 2 days of March Madness for my 2 days, or the first day of March Madness and the day after the Super Bowl. If you give me 2 days, that's the only decision I got to make. Am I using both of the days on March Madness or one on March Madness and one on the Super Bowl? Opening day for Major League Baseball has kind of lost a little bit of its luster, if you ask me. But can we all agree, ladies and gentlemen, is this change we can believe in? Let's make America great again. Let's give the people what they want. A sports holiday. A sports holiday. Can I get an amen?
Amen. Marc, as a sports fan, how brutal is the Monday after this weekend, after you've just been, divulging in basketball nonstop, and then it's like that Monday, there's just no sports. It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like coming off of something. You're like, I need to come down slowly. This is too abrupt. Where are the games?
No, exactly, Chris. And I hit that, Chris, the Monday, like the Tuesday after the Super Bowl. Yeah. So this year it was February 14th, Valentine's Day.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I've been eating steak every day. You just took my steak away from me. Now what am I going to do?
Mhm.
You know, I got like a bunch of sides in front of me now, man. Where's the beef?
Mhm.
And it is when you do this, guys, every single day to bring you into what Chris and I do, it is a real challenge. Like you
Mhm.
get used to having the creme de la creme. You get used to having the best of content. And that's like suddenly you got to turn on the creative part of your brain again
Mhm.
because it's like, whoa, I've got 4 hours to fill. And I don't know how I'm going to do that. And I don't want to feel like I'm filling time. I want to feel like I'm
Mhm.
providing content of value to our audience. So it becomes very, very difficult. By the way, GAD says, Mark beat me too. Can I get an amen? We're thinking along the same lines. Brother David Garrick says, rather have the day after college football championship. But see, Chris, you got to be able to have a consensus among Americans
Mhm.
as to what day it's going to be. I don't think enough Americans would pick the day after the college football championship, right? I don't think because the college football championship should be on Saturday
Yeah, I
anyway.
mean,
Can we
that's
agree
what I
on
was
that?
gonna say. That's the real problem with that. Like, why is it played on a Monday night? That makes no sense. No sense at all. But yeah, that just makes too much sense. Um, Speaking of college basketball, Mark, you asked me this on your show on Monday. I want to turn it back on you. As we begin March Madness, dust has settled for the Gamecocks. Obviously, their season has come to an end, mercifully, some would say. But when you look at Lamont Paris, year one, now that it's over, when you look back, how do you evaluate it? If you want to give it a grade, I know I told you C plus because it's strange to be pounding your chest and gloating over a year in which you performed as poorly as they did at times, but you did overachieve. You did overachieve preseason expectations, which were 14th in the league. You finished 12th. Your just overall thoughts on year one of Lamont Paris?
B. I give him a B, Chris, because this was the projected last place team in the SEC. They did not finish last in the SEC. You guys know that I've said, other folks have said that the Gamecock roster remind me of Gigi Jackson and four guys from the Y. You know what I mean? And so when you don't finish last with that roster, and then at the end of the season, you're largely competitive in almost every single game that you're playing, it paints a picture for what next year could look like. And, now you're on the 2-year plan. You have 2 growth years. Next year, the goal is NIT. And the following year, the goal is tournament. And maybe that's realistic, Chris, and maybe it isn't. Okay. Maybe it's going to take a little bit longer than that. But freaking Brad Brownell has gotten 13 years of mediocrity. All right. Interestingly, both Clemson and South Carolina fans who have informed us in great numbers that the goals for their programs are the same. Make the tournament more years than you miss it. Well, Brad Brownell has just been brought back for a 14th season, which shows you all you need to know about where Clemson Athletics prioritizes men's basketball. They don't at all. Okay? Because what they're saying is, oh, yeah, Brad Brownell met the criteria to continue. What? Almost making the tournament, Chris, is good enough for keeping your job. Almost. Being one of the first 4 out, we got to bring him back. And I had a number of Clemson fans say to me, this is one of the most successful seasons in Clemson men's basketball history. You can't fire him. One of the most successful seasons. Bro, you set your own expectations. There is nothing limiting you. What was Gonzaga before the last 10 or 12 years? What were they? Seriously. Like, you build a program, you are making history every single day. So decide what your standards are going to be for your program and then hold everyone accountable to those standards. Go get it, go make it happen. But Chris, I got to tell you, man, in the history of college athletics, have you ever seen a rival bend over another rival the way that South Carolina has bent over Clemson the last 100 days?
Yeah,
Have you ever seen it? I went back and
no.
I was looking at this, Chris. I was looking at best rivalries and
Mhm.
most painful moments of rivalries. In the last 100 days, the Gamecocks have knocked Clemson out of the college football playoff, and that's not coming from me. That's coming from a college football playoff committee member that I spoke to. Okay, they knocked Clemson out of the playoff. Clemson is in the playoff if they beat South Carolina, and at least indirectly, South Carolina also knocked Clemson out of March Madness. in the last 100 days. I mean, you guys are sticking them, and then you're letting them bleed to death over the last 100 days. I cannot think of another instance, Chris, in the history of college athletics where a rival has hurt another rival more in a shorter period of time than the Gamecocks have hurt Clemson. And I know you're probably very empathetic toward Clemson. You're probably extending your heart out to them for these moments. Look, Chris, Clemson finished 23-10 with 4 bad losses, 2 in quad 3, 2 in quad 4. Boston College, South Carolina in quad 3, and Loyola of Chicago and Louisville in quad 4. If that is 24-9 with 3 bad losses, do they get in? Maybe, right? Maybe. So consider what the Gamecocks have done to Clemson. How was that prostate exam, Clemson fans? That was absolutely positively brutal for Clemson fans. And look, man, they could beat you in football for the next 3 years, and it still wouldn't make up for what you've done for them right now.
I was going to ask you, Mark, as a Gator, and Florida State is a great rivalry. Have you ever seen a span where the Gators or FSU had the upper hand, quite like a dominant span, if you will, across all sports, or wrecking their dreams? I mean, I know obviously I think back to, which it's really intriguing when you think about 96, when what was it? FSU beat Florida in the regular season, then Florida turns around and beats FSU in the national championship, the one that matters, which crazy. I mean, I can't even imagine that happening with South Carolina and Clemson sucks. What a wild set of circumstances that would be. But what are some memorable? Do you recall any memorable like dominations like that across a certain time span with Florida?
Well,
Florida
by
State?
the way, Chris, I was in the marching band at Florida those 2 years. Okay,
really?
that year, So my sophomore year, I was in the marching band. I'll bring you guys a little story. Okay, we're on the field, Chris. We're getting ready to go on to pregame. They've got this huge this flag of Florida State with the logo on it is the length of the end zone. Okay, and I notice it's there, so I hatched a plan. Okay, let's hope that the authorities don't hear this, because hopefully the statute of limitations have expired. But Chris, the trombone section and we unrolled the flag so we would be marching right on top of it. Okay, so that's what we did. We unrolled the flag. We marched right on top of the Florida State logo. When we got back to our section, stadium security was there, quote, asking for the trombone player who unrolled the flag and had everyone march all over it. You know what I mean? No one gave me up, Chris. No one still has found me. Chris, that was a particular game. Florida lost the first game 24-21. It was a game where there were numerous late hits out of bounds that were not called. It was at Florida State. It was one of those games where you're the better team and all the BS is working against you. You get a chance through Texas's upset of Nebraska in the Big 12 championship game. And then Ohio State beat Arizona State in the Rose Bowl, which moved Florida all the way up from 4-2 for that rematch against Florida State. Steve Spurrier added in the shotgun against a fearsome defensive line of Florida State, which gave Danny Werfel, Riedel Anthony, Jacquez Green, Ike Hilliard and company, Fred Taylor, enough time to operate. And then after the game, that Florida won 52-20. Bobby Bowden said, "Now you see why I didn't want to play these guys again." I mean, now you see, because he knew that he had it. It was coming for him. It was coming for him big time. Chris, to your point, there's never been a time, in my opinion, that one rival has gotten over on another rival more, with more at stake, has hurt them more, ripped their hearts out more than South Carolina has done right now to Clemson. But in 1998, Chris, the best game ever played in the Swamp, Florida State had one of their best teams ever. Florida had 2 losses, and Florida won 32-29, essentially at the gun, in the greatest game ever played in the Swamp. I was there. It registered as a small earthquake, on the Richter scale. It was insane.
Isn't that game actually nicknamed the greatest game ever played in the Swamp?
It is.
Because I remember playing, you'd play NCAA football, and they'd have the moments or whatever, and you could go back and play it. And I think that was, and then there was another one, the the choke at Doak. That was the other one, I think. Yeah, I just recall that for whatever reason.
I don't remember the choke at Doak at all, but I remember I remember
right,
the
of
greatest game I ever
course,
played at a
of
swamp.
course,
Yeah.
of course, yeah, of course. No, that's Florida State in the '90s was incredible between Spurrier and Bowden, what have you. Speaking of football, Mark, of course, Gamecocks returned to the practice field yesterday. Spring ball underway. And it's like I told you, I think on Monday, I think it more so provides us, kind of throws us the alley-oop, a great opportunity to, to bring football back in a conversation because realistically, we're not behind closed doors. We're not going to really be at practice. A lot of it's just reinstilling fundamentals and kind of going through the basics. And then we've talked about it, right? Spring games and how they can kind of feel. I mean, it's a glorified scrimmage at the end of the day, but when you look at South kind of football again, you start up the conversation. And I just think about, a new year, new expectations, sort of the pressure surrounding the Gamecocks football program. And I think the big storyline for this spring is, as spring ball begins, the Dowell Loggins era begins and Spencer Rattler and expectations for him. And, you come off of last year and I know the way you finished, obviously we have this idea of Spencer Rattler and what he's going to be this year and what this offense is going to look like. But I don't know, Mark, a lot of big storylines. Again, I know it's just spring ball, but for us diehards, it's something that we follow extremely closely. And, just excited to see how, with the Gamecocks, how it progresses. And just sort of, if you read enough between the lines, same thing, with you in Florida or every single SEC school, if you listen to the coordinators, listen to players talk, you can kind of start to see, okay, who are the stars of the fall going to be? You can kind of start to get some glimpses of what your football team's going to look like. But really intriguing, bottom line, Mark, just glad to have some football back in the fold, if you will.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, man. This hurts me deep within my loins, Chris. Really, really does. Is the fact that I can't think of a season with less excitement heading in if you're a Florida fan, and I can't think of a season with more excitement heading in if you're a Gamecock fan. Right? Was it you, Chris, that posted the SEC coaches rankings the other day? Like somebody,
yeah, Beamer was ranked 24th. Yes, 24th.
Well, no. But yesterday, I think it was just the SEC head coaches.
Oh, no, I didn't post that.
Yeah, and Beamer was 6th, and Napier was 11th out of 14 coaches. And I looked at the list and I was like, darn it, I can't argue this at this point. You know what I mean? Like I can't argue it. I can't argue who was ahead of him. I can't argue being 11th because of what's been seen and what's been shown and not having the track record. And, I think best case scenario for Florida this year, 7-5. Best case scenario for the Gamecock, 7-5 is an abomination at Florida. Okay. Right. That's the best case scenario. Best case scenario for the Gamecocks this year, I think, is 9-3. And I think it's all going to hinge upon how quickly everything gels with the new system. Right? To what degree are the playmakers getting the ball? To what degree is Dowell Loggins an upgrade over Marcus Satterfield from a year ago? These are questions that we don't yet know the answer to. But I'll tell you, Chris, at some point you're looking at where South Carolina is, and certainly there are questions, but there are more questions about the rest of the teams in that division, right? And have we not highlighted that in year one, Shane Beamer finishes 4th in the East? Year 2, he finishes 3rd in the East. Year 3, why should the goal not be 2nd in the East this year? Kentucky adds Devin Leary. They've got a good core group of players and a good system, but they're beatable. Tennessee, everyone wants to, channeling my inner Dennis Green, crown Josh Heupel's ass. But Josh Heupel had one really good year. Like, I don't understand all this Josh Heupel love. Like, Brad Crawford had him in his top 10 coaches, Chris. He may be eventually, but after 1 year, year one was what, 7-6, 6-7 after year one. So, you lose Hendon Hooker, you lose your 2 best wide receivers. What's the guarantee that Tennessee is this top 10 or top 15 team next year? Florida is clearly in transition. And you're never worried about Missouri or Vanderbilt, except for the fact that they could beat you or I, right? You're not worried about them in the standings, though. So I think South Carolina has fewer questions than anyone else in the East, not named Georgia. And so I think 2nd place is a very viable and realistic goal.
Yeah, I think you make great points there, Mark, in regards to the rest of the conference, rest of the division, if you will. And certainly we'll spend a lot of time talking about that, breaking it down as we get closer to kickoff. Something I talked about, Mark, earlier this week. Would love to get your thoughts on it. With Texas and Oklahoma joining the league, and everybody's going to have 3 permanent opponents. I said for South Carolina that I thought the 3 permanent opponents, or I thought what would be good. Obviously we're all just kind of throwing stuff at a wall, seeing if it sticks, and making our projections, if you will. But I said that for South Carolina, because I think you got to be realistic, right? You can't say Mississippi State, Missouri, and Vandy, right? It has to be balanced. So I said for the Gamecocks, I'd love to get your thoughts. The 3 permanent opponents that I'd be fine with, I'd be good with. Georgia, because I love the border war, and I love playing the best. Florida, I like that game. I like playing the Gators. And then Vandy. Your thoughts on the 3 permanent opponents and
come
on the South?
Chris.
Well, I mean, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I think Florida's going to be back. I think Florida's going to be a tough team. A lot of people said Tennessee instead of Florida. I mean, I have no problems with that either.
Here's what so you had Georgia,
Florida, Vandy. Georgia, Florida,
okay,
Vandy.
So here's what I heard there. Here's what I heard when you just said that. Georgia, Florida, and let's sit back and have some candy. That's what I heard.
Hey, somebody has to play Vanderbilt. Somebody's got to play it.
Yeah, I volunteer. Florida Volunteers over here. Okay.
Are you sure after last year, Florida Volunteers? Are you sure?
Georgia, Florida, and that looks like some good movie candy over there. You see that? Give me some of that. No, man. Look. I went, Chris. I actually did a deep dive on this when the projections came out, and Florida and LSU got based on okay, scale of 1 to 10, Chris. You evaluate Alabama as a 10, right? 10, right? So scale of 1 to 10, Georgia's a 10. Florida, where are they? Maybe a 7 as a program, 7, right? 6, 7, somewhere in there. South Carolina, maybe a 6 as a program, but probably better than Florida this next year. So I went through and just like what you could expect to face on a year in, year out basis. Florida and LSU got the worst draw of anybody because they threw Florida, Oklahoma for no reason. You know what I mean? Like Oklahoma was on, and like Oklahoma as a program is an 8. What you could expect to get each year in that game is an 8. And I think Georgia, South Carolina, and Oklahoma were Florida's. Where is the candy in that threesome? You know what I'm saying? That's not any threesome that I've ever been a fan of, Chris. So look, I've got an issue there. I've got a real issue there. And I like that Nick Saban popped off about that because it's not set in stone yet. And so it's holding them accountable. Vandy, Chris, give me a break.
Somebody has to play them. Somebody has to play them. That's all I'm saying. Who's going to get them? Somebody's going to get them. That's all I'm saying. Somebody's going to get them.
Well, I'll tell you the proposed opponents for Auburn. And I thought this was cute. Auburn would get Alabama, Georgia, and Vanderbilt.
Well, you kind of have to throw them the layup at that point, right? My goodness. Good luck with Bama and Georgia every year.
Well, we got a couple of questions coming in here, Chris. Gamecock Barbecue and Jeff Golidge want to ask me, do I think Billy Napier gets another year? Jeff Golidge says if they finish 6-6. Guys, I don't think continuing to replace coaches is the way to go. I'm going to give Billy Napier at least 4 years. Okay, at least 4 years. Because you got to understand, in the culture where everyone pieces out and leaves in the transfer portal and NIL, the cupboard was bare essentially when he took over. He had Anthony Richardson and not much else. They're begging Ricky Pearsall to come back and not go pro to be their number 1 wide receiver next year. And they had Graham Mertz, elect to go to Florida. It was the only school that gave him a scholarship out of the transfer portal, Chris. So I'm going to give him some time, and I don't think you can write the book on him after year 2. I think this year is going to be ugly. And I think I'm going to be talking a lot of Florida fans off the ledge after this year in Gainesville.
That's what I was going to say, Mark. Do you think that your school of thinking is going to be the popular consensus amongst Gator fans? Because I don't think so. I mean, the expectations at Florida.
No. I think they're going to be. No, I think they're going to be fire and brimstones, and the natives are restless, and the pitchforks are coming out. I think all that's going to happen, Chris. But what I'm saying is, it's very possible if you think about it in the lines that you think about Lamont Paris. Like if Lamont Paris goes 13-17 next year, do you know that he's not the guy? I don't think you can say that, right? I don't think you can say that at all, right? And then it goes back to, well, we're in a different era now, But consider how long it took Spurrier to pop at South Carolina, right? Consider how long that took. Consider how long it took Frank Beamer to pop at Virginia Tech, right? Now, Florida's a different animal, but Chris, when you have two failed head coaching hires in a row, the program takes a step back. When you have three failed coaching hires in a row, the program isn't what it used to be.
Right.
And the Florida Gators had Jim McElwain, Will Muschamp, Jim McElwain, and Dan Mullen. Now, Dan Mullen, you can make a point, maybe was fired a little bit too early, did some good things. But Jim McElwain, Will Muschamp, Jim McElwain, Dan Mullen, you're going to tell me you're going to close the book on Billy Napier after a couple of years?
Yeah.
For continuity's sake, don't you need to just stick with this for a little while, right?
And he was such a highly sought after guy too. I feel like he was such like a hot name. When you were talking about potential big time coaches or whatever when he was coming out of Louisiana. So no, I agree with you. I don't think changing coaches every 2 or 3 years is the way to go. Although they're getting paid a lot and the pressures to win are there, I just you can't build a program that way. You just realistically can't do it. So I would agree with you 110%. Mark, I know we've got SEC baseball obviously starting this weekend. Hey, Florida has Alabama tomorrow night. I think they're on SEC Network, top 25 matchup. The Gators are they're red hot. I think Florida's very, very good. South Carolina 17-1 now. I'll just ask you really briefly, as SEC play, as we really get into, dare I say, Mark, the important part of the schedule, because non-conference and everything is great. Obviously, taking down the Tigers 2 of 3, that was awesome, great to talk about. But SEC play, Mark, is where you separate the men from the boys, truly, right? I mean, this is where we find out who you really are. Your impressions of, the SEC, if you have any, but South Carolina baseball, what they've been doing. And obviously, again, I know it's against non-conference competition, but, the way they're swinging the bats, I think, is catching the attention of everyone in college baseball. And I'm really, really excited to see if that continues as they go up against weekend after weekend, the best pitching that the collegiate game has to offer.
Yeah, look, South Carolina looks great. Chris, I'm waiting for you to amend your statement that you're not sure South Carolina is Omaha bound. You're not sure. Chris, name me 10 programs thus far that look better. Okay. The lineup is absolutely popping. The SEC, Chris, just consider where the SEC is as a conference, where it's number 1 in football, number 1 in baseball, top 3 in basketball. The money that the football programs have generated for everybody else, every other athlete, tennis, gymnastics, baseball, should thank the football players every time they cross paths with them, because they are rising all the ships for the other programs in the league. But I will say, Chris, that I think college baseball has a real visibility problem. I was lamenting the fact in November, that the Clemson, South Carolina basketball game, men's basketball, wasn't on TV. And people are saying, what? It's on my TV. It's on my TV. No. Your ESPN Plus is not broadcast television, brother. Right. And so when you're somebody like me, Chris, and you have sold me, and then the Reedy River rivalry sold me at Fluor Field on paying more attention to college baseball. Like, I need to be able to turn on, I've got YouTube TV. I need to be able to turn on YouTube TV and have it be there on one of the networks. I don't want to be hooking up HDMI cables and plugging my phone into my TV and like putting up a projector screen and all this stuff. It needs to be more visible. It has a visibility problem, right? For a number of years in this country, Major League Baseball was more popular than the NBA. Well, college baseball has never been more popular than college basketball. Why? College basketball has March Madness, but college baseball has a fantastic postseason. I love the postseason system of college baseball. So I think the powers that be need to really sit down and say, we've got a great product here. How do we make this more visible? How do we get more games on these hundreds of channels so people know right where to go to see all the best games, man? I think there's a visibility problem with college baseball.
Yeah, Mark, and I would agree with you, and I think many others would as well, because it is a great product. I know baseball is sort of an acquired taste for some, or it's something you love from birth, or from when you're a young child or a young kid or what have you. But I definitely agree with you. It's a great product that needs to be featured more. Marc Ryan of Offsides with Marc Ryan. Mark, I got one last thing for you. It's a little bit off the wall, a little bit of change of pace, more so about you directly. And what I think so intriguing about you and your content, obviously you're a national sports guy, but being in the state of South Carolina, you talk a lot of Gamecocks and a lot of Tigers. How were you able to effectively position yourself sort of in the middle? And despite what some may say, you are in the middle, because it's funny. I had somebody comment in our Discord about, let Mark know that, we knocked Clem sucks out of the tournament. I'm like, dude, he's been ragging them all week. I'm like, Mark gives Clemson just as much hell as he gives South Carolina, but most Gamecock fans, and it's just the nature of Twitter and social media, as you know, you only focus on, some people do, they only focus on the things that outrage them and make them upset. They don't give credit to all of the content. I mean, I feel that in my own space as well. But how were you able to effectively sort of toe the line? Because as you felt, right, it's a really tough line to toe. And I feel like you probably, live by this. I would say if both sides dislike you, then you're doing something right. Or if both sides give you hell, or you create banter on both sides, you're doing your job. So how are you able to effectively do that? Because, again, I know as a national sports host, although being in the state of South Carolina, it's kind of like one of those things. You're either garnet and black or you're orange and purple. And if you're neither and you're in the middle, both sides give you shit. So how are you able to teeter that so well?
Chris, the best thing I can tell you is, you got to have your team that is not either one of those. You know what I mean? And if you have your team and you give 0 Fs, right, then that's the best way you can do it. And my favorite part of this, Chris, is Clemson fans think I'm in bed with the Gamecocks. Gamecock fans think I'm in bed with Clemson. And you got to make sure, Chris, you throw everybody a bone when they've earned it, right? You got to make sure you do that. But, I was hearing from Clemson fans this week, man, you don't seem very #all in to me. And I'm like, I never was. When was I ever all in? You use the hashtag when you write a tweet about them for the same reason that you and everyone else does, so it's more easily found. But Chris, you gotta, you really have to take note of the positives and negatives that you are releasing. And at the end of each month, Chris, we look back at the podcast that we post, the content that we post, and we say, okay, we had 20 posts on Clemson, and okay, 9 were positive and 11 were negative. Let's try to get that as close to 10 and 10 as possible. And then we look at South Carolina. We've got 20 posts on South Carolina. 11 were positive, 9 were negative. Let's try to get that as close to 50-50 as possible, which creates a situation, Chris, where the listeners just go nuts because they don't know what to think and they don't know what to believe. But you just do your best, man, to be fair. And I appreciate the compliment very, very much, because it's not an easy thing. When people say that our show is the Paul Feinbaum of South Carolina, who fans the flame of the war in Alabama, is how he came to fame, right? I take that as a huge compliment, man, because it's not easy. Everybody wants to classify you as being on one side or other. With you, Chris, it's easy. There's no question about where you stand, right? But for me, there was a missing link in this community. Obviously Gamecock fans are there. There's a Clemson Homer station in our market, right? There was a real need for somebody to come in and just shoot straight with people, right? Sometimes they can't handle the truth, Chris. Sometimes they can't handle it, but there's a real need to get in there and shoot straight with people. And that's what we do to the very, very best of our ability.
Mark, very well said. And again, that's why you guys have so much success. So again, man, I love to hear it. I appreciate you coming on. Obviously, again, guys, Offsides of Marc Ryan, 3 to 7 every single day, Monday through Friday. You guys can check him out on the airways at the Fan Upstate, of course, and at Marc Ryan on air on Twitter and on social media. Mark, appreciate you taking the time, man. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with you on Monday of next week.
Sounds good, brother. Love you guys. Take care. Have a great week. Enjoy the games. Should be holidays. First 2 days of March Madness. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Yes, sir. We'll talk to you soon, Mark. Appreciate you. Great stuff with Marc Ryan.